Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today as we introduce the assault weapons ban, overdue and necessary legislation to keep communities safe and help prevent the deadly massacres that are happening daily in our country. My name is David Cicilline. I represent the 1st Congressional District of Rhode Island and delighted to be here with so many of my colleagues today. Today marks the start of Gun Violence Survivors Week, and the fact that we as a nation have experienced so much gun violence that we felt called to designate a week to survivors should alone demonstrate the urgent need for action. We're joined today by 2 school shooting survivors, Jordan Gomes, who survived the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, and Alea Eastman, who survived the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. We're also joined by Dr. Joseph Sakrin, himself a gun violence survivor who now serves as the Director of Emergency General Surgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital and is Vice Chair of the Board at the Brady Campaign, and many other survivors of gun violence. I also want to thank my colleagues who have joined us, Judiciary Ranking Member Jerry Nadler, who's been a steadfast partner in this fight, holding the first markup on this legislation in nearly 30 years in the last Congress and shepherding it through passage in the House. Congresswoman Judy Chu, who represents Monterey Park and is chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. Congresswoman Diana DeGette, who is sponsor of the Keep Americans Safe Act. Congressman Brad Schneider, who co-leads the Keep Americans Safe Act, who represents Highland Park, Illinois. And Congresswoman Robin Kelly, a longtime champion of gun violence prevention and author of numerous pieces of gun safety legislation. It's important that we recognize that gun violence is not an incurable disease or a natural disaster. It's preventable, and a ban on assault weapons will save lives. There's no good reason why we have not reinstated this policy that will reduce gun massacres in our communities using these weapons of war. These military-style weapons were designed for the battlefield, for maximum efficiency when a soldier is engaged in combat. And the military features banned by this bill are features that make these guns more deadly by increasing accuracy, enhancing control, and making them easier to conceal. All of these characteristics that are enabling killers to murder as many people as quickly as possible. These weapons have no place in our communities. They have turned our streets, our schools, our grocery stores, movie theaters, hospitals, nightclubs, festivals, and dance halls into bloody killing fields. And they're used to murder our children, our friends, and our neighbors, and the police trying to protect them. In 2016 and 2017 alone, more than 24 officers were slain in the line of duty by an assault weapon. 1 in 5 officers killed in the line of duty is killed by an assault weapon, which is why the Major Cities Police Chiefs Association has endorsed this legislation. It is unconscionable that anyone can walk into a store and legally purchase a weapon capable of inflicting the carnage we've seen in Monterey Park, Highland Park, Buffalo, Uvalde, Atlanta, Sutherland Springs, Las Vegas, Orlando, Parkland, and the list sadly goes on and on and on. Yet from September 2014 until July 2022, we failed to take action to stop these weapons from flooding into our communities and being used time and time again in mass shootings. Today, we are reintroducing this legislation that passed the House last summer in a bipartisan vote of 217 to 213. We already have 195 co-sponsors and will be working hard to gain even more support. As many of you know, the original assault weapons ban was in place from 1994 to 2004, and based on the clear evidence that it was effective in reducing mass murders, we've proposed a new assault weapons ban. Compared with the decade before its adoption, the 1994 assault weapons ban was associated with a 25% drop in gun massacres and a 40% drop in fatalities. And as soon as the ban expired, fatalities and shootings skyrocketed again. And when an assault weapon is used during a mass shooting, 6 times as many people are shot. And so today, I'm imploring my colleagues to join me in taking action to get these weapons of war, which are designed for maximum destruction of human life, off our streets. The Second Amendment is not without limits. Imagine if we clung to the desire to protect our children and our communities as tightly as some of my colleagues cling to their rifles. There are more guns in this country than people, more mass shootings than days in the year, and this is a uniquely American problem. And while we know that this bill won't stop all gun violence, it will effectively decrease it and will save lives. Because these weapons were designed for military combat, they don't just kill, they decimate. The shots fired can tear a softball-sized wound into a victim. Researchers estimate that if we still had the federal assault weapons ban in place, we would see a 70% decline in mass shooting deaths. Think about that. If the ban had remained in effect, 70% of the families torn apart by these massacres would still have their loved ones. We can't bring those victims back to their families and friends, but we can work to prevent more carnage moving forward. Let me end by saying this. In my faith tradition, we're taught that whoever destroys a soul, it is considered as if they destroyed an entire world. And whoever saves a life, it's considered as if they saved an entire world. Let's come together to save lives. And with that, I have the privilege of introducing my former chairman and now the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, who has been such a champion of this legislation, ensured that we had a markup and passage in the last Congress, Congressman Jerry Nadler of New York.
Well, thank you very much. I want to begin by thanking David Cicilline for introducing this critical piece of legislation. He has been a great champion on gun safety issues, and I appreciate his leadership on this legislation. As we have learned all too well in recent years, assault weapons, especially when combined with high-capacity magazines, are the weapon of choice for mass shootings. These military-style weapons are designed to kill the most people in the shortest amount of time. Quite simply, there is no place for them on our streets. In 1994, we banned these ruthlessly efficient killing machines, and countless lives were saved. But that ban was allowed to lapse 10 years later. And since then, we have seen the predictable results. Mass shootings have increased exponentially, and our public spaces, schools, movie theaters, supermarkets, houses of worship, parades, you name it, have all become vulnerable to attack. How many more of our friends, neighbors, and loved ones have to die before we take action? I was very proud as chairman of the House Judiciary Committee last Congress to move this legislation through the committee and to pass it out of the House. Although our Republican colleagues opposed it, marching as usual in lockstep with the extreme agenda of the gun industry, I know that I speak for my colleagues up here when I say that we are not deterred, that we will continue to make the case just as forcefully for this absolutely necessary legislation. We cannot hide our heads in the sand. There is one factor that ties together the deadliest mass shootings in this country, and that is the use of a semi-automatic assault weapon. These weapons were used in recent shootings in Monterey Park, and an incident just yesterday in which a man armed with an assault rifle and 13 magazines opened fire in a target in Omaha, but was shot by police before anyone was hit, thank God. We must take these dangerous weapons off our streets and protect our communities. I want to thank Congressman Cicilline for his leadership in bringing this legislation forward. And I thank all my colleagues here for their work to protect Americans from gun violence. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Congresswoman Judy Chu, the chair of CAPAC and who represents Monterey Park, California.
A week and a half ago, on the eve of Lunar New Year, a horrifying thing happened. A gunman entered the Star Ballroom Dance Studio in Monterey Park, California, my hometown of 37 years. He was armed with a semi-automatic assault pistol that had an extended magazine attached to it, and in a spraying motion, shot 42 times at the innocent people inside, murdering 11 people and injuring 9 others. He then went to a second dance studio, and had not a young man wrestled with him and took his gun away, we would have had twice the carnage. At a moment when we should be joyfully celebrating a new year, the Asian American community is reeling with grief. To those who also feel anger at this moment, I join you. Our neighbors were lost too soon, and once again, our country is mourning a mass murder. We need action. We need elected officials across the country to hear the pleas from their constituents and law enforcement officials and pass additional legislation to protect our communities from future gun violence. That's why I stand in support today of the Assault Weapons Ban Act introduced by my friend Representative David Cicilline. This bill would end the importation, sale, and possession of assault weapons and large capacity ammunition devices. These deadly weapons are designed for military use and solely for inflicting maximum damage, and are the firearm of choice for mass shootings such as the one that my community had just experienced. I agree with Brandon Tsai, the young man who was our hero disarming the shooter at that second location, the Lai Ballroom Studio, who said he knew when he saw the gunman and the weapon that it was not built and customized for robbing the studio, but that the shooter was there to kill all the people. And as chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, I am proud to announce that CAPAC fully endorses this important bill as a critical measure in keeping our communities safe. Weapons of war have no place in our streets, schools, grocery stores, places of worship, movie theaters, or dance studios. This weekend, I met with the families of the different victims, and I want to transmit to all of you what one family member said, and she asked me to bring her statement to you. She said, "I wish to speak for the many innocent victims and their families and unequivocally condemn the gun violence that has killed and injured so many, resulting in numerous broken families, creating irreversible lifetime suffering. For many years, the U.S. has been a country where everyone desires to come, but the increasing threats from gun violence has severely tarnished that image. Do something about it." I believe the passage of this bill would honor the victims of Monterey Park who had simply gathered to dance at a time of celebration. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join in this effort. And now I would like to introduce Congresswoman Diana DeGette, who is the sponsor of Keep Americans Safe Act.
Thank you so much, Judy, and we've been praying for your constituents since that terrible shooting. I also want to thank Congressman Cicilline for his leadership and unwavering efforts on this. And I mostly want to thank all the advocates for coming today. This is not an easy thing for you to do. It's a hard thing, but eventually we will have justice, and it's because of your efforts. So I'll never forget where I was on the day of the horrific mass shooting at Columbine High School, which was in my district at the time, and which was the first really high publicity shooting. I had just been reelected to my second term in Congress. And for those of you who don't know, I just got elected to my 14th term in Congress. Think about that. Those years since 1998, all of the mass shootings, all of the deaths, all of the children we have lost in the United States of America to gun violence. I was the mother of 2 young daughters at that time, and I'll never forget the sudden fear that I felt as a parent for their safety, even though neither of them were anywhere near Columbine at that time. This is the same fear that millions of parents feel every day, over and over again, since the news breaks of these tragedies. And I gotta say, enough is enough. As a society, we cannot continue to live this way. We have to take it upon ourselves to stand up against the special interests and to protect our communities from this constant source of violence. This important legislation not only bans the sale of semi-automatic assault weapons, but it also includes legislation that I have worked on for many years to ban the sale and transfer of high-capacity magazines. We've learned that no two mass shootings are the same, but a common thread that unites us in some of the deadliest of the events is the use of high-capacity magazines. In fact, over half of all of the mass shootings in this country have used high-capacity magazines. These allow a shooter to fire more rounds more quickly without having to stop and reload, and without giving a savior the ability to take the person down. They allow a gunman simply to kill more people in the shortest amount of time. And that's why experts around the country agree that banning the sale of high-capacity magazines would be one of the most effective things we could do to protect our communities. Frankly, there's no legitimate reason why any civilian in this country needs a gun that holds 30, 60, or even 100 rounds. These devices aren't designed for hunting. These devices are designed for war. And if we're going to get serious about protecting our communities, we have to get them off our street now. Since the previous ban on high-capacity magazines expired in 2004, along with the assault weapons ban, their use and commission of crimes has increased threefold. In 2012, the gunman, also equipped with high-capacity magazines holding up to 30 rounds each, killed 20 children and 6 teachers at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. That same year, just a couple of miles down the road from my house in Denver, Colorado, a gunman equipped with a 100-round magazine drum opened fire in a crowded movie theater, which was crowded with military and ex-military movie guests in Aurora, Colorado, killed 12 people and injured 58 more. And using a high-capacity magazine, he shot 70 people in less than 2 minutes. Those who survived the shooting said they were pinned down, unable to move or flee or take down the gunman because of the constant barrage of bullets coming at them from the 100-round magazine. So here's the thing. People always say, oh, if we just train people to stop these gunmen, it'll solve these shootings. A theater full of military personnel were unable to do what they were trained to do in such instances because the shooter was using a 100-round magazine and the bullets never stopped. Parkland, Dayton, Boulder, Uvalde, the list goes on and on. And so there's no single, well, maybe Representative Cicilline's bill will help stop these horrific events, but there's things we can do to make them less deadly. And passing our legislation into law that bans the sale of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines will do just that. I urge Congress to take these bills up before another child is killed. And with that, I'm honored to introduce Congresswoman Robin Kelly, who's the co-chair of the Congressional Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. Robin.
Thank you so much, Diana. As my colleagues know, as we talk about mass shootings, I'm always the one that talks about Chicago, and it's one by one by one, and I call it a slow motion massacre. But even in Chicago now, we're seeing 10 people getting shot at once, 4 people dying. So the mass shooting, beside the one by one, is happening more and more in Chicago proper itself. I'm here today to stand with a very good friend, a gun violence prevention hero, Congressman David Cicilline, to support yet another attempt to ban assault weapons in this country. These deadly weapons of war have been allowed to persist in our country for far too long. They wreak havoc on our communities, our families, our neighbors, and our schools. Assault weapons do not only cause harm when they grab headline news for mass shootings, they are used in the everyday gun violence that too often plagues some of my communities that I represent. Time and time again, a beloved son or daughter or mother or father is taken away from their families because of these weapons of war. I have faith, I'm an optimist, that we can get this done. Why? Because we've already done it. In 1994, as you've heard, Congress had the courage to stand up to the special interests and say no more. This body passed an assault weapon ban and saved thousands of lives. But since then, we have allowed these weapons to proliferate and tear our families apart. It is shameful that this body continues to sit on its hands as children are murdered by these weapons of war. Every day we don't act is a day that we put our communities at risk of more harm. As my colleague said, something just happened yesterday. We need policy and action, not just thoughts and prayers. I want real substantive change, and so do the American people. Look at the polls and the statistics. Our constituents serve better than this. The data is very, very clear. These weapons are a threat to the safety and security of our country. And I strongly support the passage of the assault weapons ban, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. And we also have to make sure we implement what we passed last Congress: trafficking, red flag laws, straw purchasing. We have to make sure what we pass gets implemented. Thank you, and it's my honor to introduce my colleague and my Illinois delegation mate, Brad Schneider.
Thanks, Robin. And I want to thank my colleagues, and in particular, David Cicilline, for all of your leadership in carrying this critical legislation forward. I'm going to reflect for a moment as I stand here. I first came to Congress 10 years ago. As we were coming into Congress, we were at a training session or orientation session when one of my new colleagues from Connecticut looked at her phone and said, at breakfast, and said, "Oh my God, there's been a shooting." It was Elizabeth Esty, in the district she represented was Sandy Hook. We learned over the course of that day, has been mentioned before, 20 first graders and 6 teachers were murdered. We came into Congress hopeful that we might be able to do something to reduce the horrific gun violence. 10 years ago, I stood in this room, as we stand now with a group of people, as we have now. My guest was Cleopatra Pendleton and her family, whose daughter Hadiya had been shot in Chicago. Hadiya had recently attended the inauguration of President Obama for a second term and was simply gathered with friends at a park when she was murdered. If I go back even further, my middle name Scott, is after my late uncle Sam, who was murdered when a gunman walked into his office. Gun violence affects us all. Again, from a personal standpoint, I can tell you that my uncle, though he was murdered in 1943, 80 years ago, if you ask my aunt, uncle, and my mother, it's as if he was killed yesterday. People don't recover. So today, as we mark the first day of Gun Violent Survivors Awareness Week, know that it is not just the people who lost someone or survived a shooting recently. This goes on for decades. When I stood here 10 years ago, I couldn't imagine two things. One is that Congress would fail to take any action. We were optimistic that something was going to happen after Sandy Hook. Something so awful couldn't go without a response. But it did. The second is that the list of names that become identified with a shooting, Columbine, as was mentioned before, Sandy Hook, Las Vegas, Pulse nightclub, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, Buffalo, Uvalde, Monterey Park, or my own community of Highland Park. We just have to say the name, and you know what we are talking about. But again, as we mark Gun Violence Survivors Awareness Week, we have to remember that these communities were traumatized, were devastated, and they remain so today. And the list I just named was literally just the iceberg. For every one of these communities, there are hundreds of others who are suffering the same tragedy. Last year, there were more than 600 mass shootings, and this year, we are already ahead of that pace. Now, I recognize that not every mass shooting involves a military assault weapon, but too often, when the intent is to kill or maim as many people as quickly as possible, the obvious choice is a military assault weapon. Whether it was the Batman movie in Aurora or the shootings we've seen this year. 7 months ago at 10:14 a.m. on July 4th, at the Independence Day in Highland Park, a monster with one of these assault weapons climbed a ladder, looked down on the thousands of people joyously gathered together celebrating for the first time in 3 years, the 4th of July, and unleashed 83 bullets in less than a minute. 83 bullets in less than a minute, murdering 7 people, wounding dozens of others, and traumatizing our entire community. As we stand here today at the beginning of Gun Violence Survivor Awareness Week, you have to know that the people who were shot that day are not yet healed. Many will never fully heal. The devastation, as David mentioned, of these assault weapons, where a bullet can cause a wound the size of a softball, where a bullet can penetrate multiple individuals, killing them both. These are weapons of war, and the damage to most of us is just utterly inconceivable. So today we have schools preemptively taking the DNA of the children in case, God forbid, they have to be identified by that DNA as happened in Uvalde. This is just simply unacceptable. These are weapons of war. They don't belong in our streets. They don't belong in our communities. And we have to take action to keep our kids and our communities safe. A few weeks after the Highland Park shooting, David's assault weapons bill, with the leadership of Chairman Nadler's committee and the work of the Democratic caucus, passed the House. Unfortunately, it did not pass in the Senate. Meanwhile, the mass shootings continue to happen over and over and over. We can't accept this. Not during National Gun Violence Survivor Awareness Week, not during any time. We can't allow more communities to suffer the anguish that Highland Park and so many other communities have had to incur. This Congress can pass an assault weapons ban. Today, we are introducing that ban. Our children deserve our protection, and our nation cannot wait. Thank you. Oh, I thought I was last. It is my privilege now to introduce Jordan Gomes, a survivor of Sandy Hook.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate it. And thank you to all of you for the work that you do. It's truly incredible to have your support. And speaking as a survivor, my community thanks you, and many other communities that have gone through similar events thank you as well. Hello, my name is Jordan Gomes, and as mentioned, I am a survivor of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting that ripped 26 angels from the arms of their loved ones on December 14th, 2012. I'm here to clear up a misconception regarding gun violence in our country, especially for some of our elected officials who seem to have forgotten. There's not a single soul among us that is impervious to a bullet. Many communities, families, and individuals across the nation, myself included, know this all too well. So where does your hesitance to ban these weapons of war come from? Do you possess some sort of misguided belief that your loved ones are safe? That the fear that has reached so many across this country, that violence will strike at any time, can never touch you? Let me correct this for you. You are no safer than any of us, and we are not safe, and bullets do not discriminate. I am here to urge members of Congress to protect our communities, to do their part to end the senseless violence that is enacted on innocents with weapons that should have never made their way into the hands of those who wield them in the first place. This call to action goes out to those who have taken oaths to protect their communities and to serve. You serve your people, not an ideology, not a party, your people. I beg you, do not wait until tragedy rocks your community. Do not wait until there are parents mourning their children, burying their children. Do not wait until your places of worship become war zones. Do not wait until simple acts such as going to school or work or the grocery store inspire fear. Don't wait. Preventative measures work. Red flag laws, bans on high-capacity magazines, safe storage laws, and soon, hopefully, this assault weapons ban, they work. They can. I believe it. And I ask all of you to join me in that. Pass this measure and protect our communities. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alea Eastman, and I am a youth organizer, and co-founder of Brady's Team Enough. And I am so grateful for the opportunity to speak on this important issue. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Like too many others, I am a survivor of senseless gun violence because America has a gun issue. In 2018, I survived the deadliest high school shooting in American history. A gunman attacked my high school, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, on Valentine's Day. Can you imagine a day of love, chocolates, candy, balloons, and lots of hugs and kisses instantly turned into a day of pain, horror, fear, and death because America has a gun issue. 14 of my classmates and 3 administrators were murdered, and another 17 were injured by an AR-15 style weapon. I was in the 3rd classroom attacked by the perpetrator. I am only alive today because of Nicholas Dworet, who in death protected me from bullets as they shattered our classroom laptops and windows. At the age of 16, I had to witness 2 of my classmates die that day and hid beneath one as they laid lifeless on our classroom tile floor. Classroom 1214 will always remember and honor Nicholas Dworet and Helena Ramsey. 2 beautiful young lives with hopes, dreams, and aspirations that were shattered and taken away at an instant because America has a gun issue. While Parkland remains one of the deadliest school shootings in modern American history, the unfortunate fact is that there have been over 300 fatal school shootings since Columbine High School in 1999. I knew I was not exempt from the threat of this violence after seeing 20 children between the ages of 6 and 7 get brutally gunned down in school. I was at middle school at the time, stunned and furious. But after witnessing that on the news at the age of 11, I was able to comprehend and understand that if something like this could happen in 2012 to children, then America must have a gun issue. Isn't the job of national and local leaders, isn't it the job of national and local leaders to put in place measures to prevent this from happening again? There's no way that ensuring public safety is in the job description when we see this violence continuing to happen again and again and again and again. Let me inform local leaders that public safety is at the top of your job description, especially when it involves children getting gunned down, not only in schools, but in our communities. This violence came knocking on our classroom door 5 years ago this month. In the past 10 years, there have been at least 25 high-profile mass shootings involving an assault weapon, in which 318 people were fatally shot and another 1,219 people were shot and survived. Last year alone, there are at least 7 high-profile mass shootings involving assault weapons: Buffalo, Uvalde, Tulsa, Highland Park, Greenwood, St. Louis, and Colorado Springs. When an assault weapon is used in a mass shooting, more than 20 times as many people are injured and more than twice as many people are killed. And as the generation that grew up under the very real constant threat of this form of violence, from practicing active shooter drills to living with constant fears and scares at events like concerts, we continue to scream and show that enough has been enough years ago. We will no longer accept a future where young people have to fear stepping into a classroom due to the risk of being gunned down by an assault weapon. We will change the course of gun violence in America. Why? Because America has a gun issue. But time and time again, too many of our leaders have failed to take action after innocent people, including children, are slaughtered by weapons of war. We know this violence is not inevitable and that there are common sense, public supported solutions. While it will take more than one bill or policy to save lives, passing a ban on assault weapons is an obvious step. That shouldn't even be a conversation right now because it is long overdue and evidently owed to the public because America has a gun issue. One way to honor victims of Parkland and other school shootings is to prevent future tragedies and allow children in the US to grow up without the fear of being gunned down while learning in their classrooms, or for young children of color walking to a local grocery store or gas station. Let children be children. They want to live and grow up too. Why is the right to own an assault weapon valued more than the invaluable, precious gift of life? I stand here on the shoulders of activists who have been fighting this fight for far too long, but we will continue this fight. And I also encourage everyone here to join us on February 14th as we take to the streets of Washington, D.C. with other young leaders to demand action now, because America has a gun issue. And later on that evening at 6:30 at Trinity Washington University's O'Connor Auditorium, as we continue to show that we will not be silenced. I encourage all of you here to join us in making noise and demanding our policymakers answer to the people. This February 14th marks the 5 years since the Parkland tragedy, and we will continue to honor our victims with action. It is time to honor all victims of gun violence and pass this assault weapons ban now. Thank you.
Thank you. It is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Joseph Sakrin, gun violence survivor and director of the Emergency General Surgery at Johns Hopkins and vice chair of the board of the Brady Campaign.
Well, thank you so much and good afternoon. My name is Joseph Sakrin, and I come before you not just as a Brady board member or a supporter of March 4th, but as a survivor of gun violence, where at the age of 17, I was nearly killed after being shot in the throat with a .38 caliber bullet. And I also come to this conversation as a trauma surgeon at Johns Hopkins Hospital, where we deal with the daily toll of gun violence that's often unseen, as we heard my dear friend, Congresswoman Kelly mention. And you know, I'm grateful to be here and so grateful for Congressman Cicilline and his colleagues that they've had the moral courage to bring this bill forward again. And I'm also proud to be standing with people like Alea and the other survivors who've had such an incredible and powerful voice on this issue. But part of me is disappointed, and part of me is heartbroken. I'm frankly disappointed at the inaction that members of Congress continue to demonstrate. And I'm heartbroken at the fact that in America today, we have children that are being slaughtered in our schools. Children who, in every attempt to do everything they can to survive, they will take blood off of a dead classmate and rub it on themselves so that if the gunman returns, they'll think they're dead. And those that survive are left with a lifetime of mental and emotional trauma. This calendar year, right, we've had already over 53 mass shootings. And of course, these capture the national attention. But let's not be mistaken, in cities like Baltimore, Philadelphia, Chicago, we have young brown and black men that are being killed on our streets. And we have a responsibility to tell those stories. You heard Congressman Nader ask how many Americans have to die. I have that same question, right? What's the number? How many children are we going to allow to die? I bet if this question was tailored around your family, that answer would be 0. And I know it sounds like a hypothetical risk. You know, people may be watching at homes in their living rooms, surrounded by their loved ones, not realizing that they too are at risk. And this risk for us as healthcare professionals is not hypothetical. We come face to face with the horrific reality of gun violence every day. We operate on children that are barely clinging to life because of a gun that wasn't safely stored. We've had to deliver babies from dead mothers that have been gunned down while sitting in their cars. And we care for high school students bleeding to death from pulverized bone and mangled extremities. We need to do something. You know, today in America, the #1 cause of death in children and adolescents is gun-related injury. And I just want you to think about that for a second. It's not cancer, it's not motor vehicle crashes, it's not poisonings, it's gun-related injury. And, you know, for too many years, so many Americans have stood on the sidelines of history and just bore witness to this. We cannot do that any longer. We have to change the current status quo. And we have to change it because countless lives are lost because their bodies are riddled with bullet wounds from weapons of war, and even at times unrecognizable. So unrecognizable that some of the parents have to identify their kids by submitting DNA samples, as we heard the congressman mention. Now, I realize that, you know, my descriptions may be grotesque and difficult to listen to and probably make you feel uncomfortable, but I think it's about time that we became uncomfortable because healthcare workers are continuing to bear the witness of this carnage on a daily basis. So I implore you, please, you know, let us pass this assault weapons ban now. This is not a Republican problem. It's not a Democratic problem. It's a uniquely American problem. And this is part of the problem that is required to address this public health issue. The next loved one or community could be yours. So I'm asking you to please act and to act now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zucker. I want to just end by, again, thanking my colleagues who are here, but most importantly, thanking these young people who are survivors of gun violence, who every time they're asked to come to an event like this and repeat their story or remember the incident, it causes them to be traumatized again. And so thank you for your courage and continue to be part of this effort. I also want to acknowledge that we are in the Gabe Zimmerman room, which of course is a room named after a staff member of Gabby Giffords who was shot and killed as a result of an incident in which our colleague was also shot. And so this very room is a memorial to a great member of the staff here in the U.S. Congress who was lost to gun violence. So thank you again to everyone who's been part of this effort, and on to passage. Thank you again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.